Welcome to Things You Should Know, Civil War Edition. Today we're going to talk about the Battle of Fort Macon, located in Carteret County, North Carolina, from March 23rd to April 26, 1862. As Burnside's expedition rolled through North Carolina, the last remaining Confederate-controlled area was Fort Macon. Fort Macon guarded Beaufort Harbor and overlooked the only major opening on the river not yet secured by the Union. Initially, the fort was offered a surrender that would result in all Confederate troops released onto parole. However, Colonel White, the Confederate commander, turned down the offer, stating, "I have the honor to decline evacuating Fort Macon." In return, U.S. General Parke's brigade marched south from the recent victory at New Bern. They occupied Beaufort and Morehead City with no resistance. Parke's goal was to take Fort Macon from the Confederate forces, and on March 29th, a company from his brigade crossed the Sound and landed unopposed on the Bogue banks. The Confederate troops responsible for defending this area, the 26th North Carolina, had retreated during the Battle of New Bern. When Parke realized this, he set up a beachhead approximately 4 miles from Fort Macon, preparing this beachhead by digging siege lines and setting up siege artillery. The preparations for the attack were completed on April 23rd when Parke opened fire on Fort Macon. Joining in on the bombardment was U.S. Naval Commander Samuel Lockwood's blockading squadron, consisting of the USS Daylight, State of Georgia, Chippewa, and Gemsbach. Once they arrived, they began to fire at Fort Macon. However, the weather was poor and the naval artillery not effective, but they continued until they were driven off by the fort's return fire. The initial siege artillery fired by the Union was not effective as well. They were unable to range in on Fort Macon and were not able to cause any substantial damage. It was at this time that the Signal Corps officer in Beaufort found the miscalculation of the fire. Acting on his own, U.S. Lieutenant W.S. Andrews of the U.S. Signal Corps got a message through to the Union artillery, which shortly thereafter altered their fire with different range corrections. The counter-battery fire disabled 17 of the Confederate guns, and as a result, Fort Macon began to crumble from the onslaught. In addition, the damage was near the ammunition magazine, and Colonel White began to fear that the magazine might be detonated by the artillery barrages. The battle itself was relatively bloodless so far. Only one Union soldier had been killed and 2 were wounded, while with the Confederate troops there had only been 9 deaths and 16 wounded. It was now that Colonel White came out to meet with General Parke to discuss terms of surrender. Parke insisted at first on an unconditional surrender, but Colonel White refused that. General Parke then returned and talked with Burnside, and the Union offered to release all Confederate troops if they agreed not to take up arms against the Union upon their release. In return, Confederate Lieutenant Colonel Moses J. White's 439-man garrison surrendered the next morning, giving control of the last Confederate-controlled area of North Carolina. The estimated casualties were 3 for the U.S., including 1 dead and 2 wounded, and 439 Confederate casualties, including 9 dead, 16 wounded, and 414 taken prisoner. Please join us next time on Things You Should Know, Civil War Edition.